And we are now recording our composting webinar. So you will get a survey, all of our participants. Please complete that survey because it'll not only make you eligible for that composter, but it'll also help me improve this class and make sure that I'm teaching so that you're learning and we're actually moving towards actually composting. So you'll see that email from me through a system called Qualtrics. It might say something like no reply. So just check that out. And like I mentioned, I'm Tina McIntyre. I'm the Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent in Seminole County. And what I do is I do education for residents and professionals based on these 9 principles. And today we're going to be talking about composting, which falls under recycling yard waste. So, down here, principle number 7, we're thinking about leaving our grass clippings on the lawn or composting them, utilizing that leaf material. I could tell you I've been raking oak leaves for months now, and I put them in a nice bucket so that I can use them in my compost, use them as a mulch. And, thinking of things that are offered by your landscape, it could be, you get a lot of fruit, maybe banana peels, that you're putting that back into the landscape. And anything that's being offered, like down in South Florida, I know my parents have coconuts. And so using those as a nice bed for the landscape, and just thinking about reusing and recycling that organic material and that stuff into your landscape. And just to briefly mention the other 9 principles, of course, it all starts off with right plant, right place. So we want to think about what species we're planting, and y'all at the community garden do a great job of planting the right veggies in the right time of the year. We don't want to be planting lettuce in August. It's just too hot. So thinking about when we're trying to harvest things and plant things as it relates to edible, or even ornamental. So, trees can get really large, thinking about that maximum height and width. Watering efficiently. So with our watering, we want to make sure that we're not applying too much water. And like Kelly said at the top of the hour, today we might get some rain. And so we want to make sure that we're using the rain first and using our irrigation as a supplement to that rainwater, instead of just having an irrigation system that goes off on a scheduled general period of time. And that's for 2 reasons, because we want to be good stewards of our water. And, it's a finite resource. It comes from our aquifer. It's limited. But also, it's basically that we want to not harm our plants. So if we are applying too much water, it's just going to be creating a rotting environment. Fertilizing appropriately. So we actually do have a new fertilizer educator that just recently joined our team. And his name is Thomas Satcher, and he's going to be out in the community educating about fertilizer. So I'm really excited. We've been doing that campaign for a while now. And it's been quite successful with residents and professionals. And now we're going to be starting to put our information in retail locations. So look out for that. Mulching 2 to 3 inches can suppress those weeds and prevent erosion, attracting wildlife. So I know y'all are doing the pollinator gardens and things like that. That's fantastic. Manage yard pests responsibly. We don't want to just be doing routine pesticide application or spraying things just because, or even if we don't know what the insect is. So identifying that insect and going from there is critical. Recycling yard waste, we talked about that. And then I always like to say, Florida Friendly Landscaping is really a water quality and water quantity program. So we're thinking about how our landscapes interact with the watershed and how we can reduce stormwater runoff and protect the waterfront. And that includes stormwater ponds and lakes, rivers, streams, culverts, canals, everything in between, that we're thinking about what we're adding to the landscape. So principle number 7, recycle yard waste. Well, if you need any motivation as to why to compost, here's some information. Well, it improves our soil structure, texture, and aeration. We typically are inheriting soils that are maybe impacted from urbanization or have little amount of aeration to them, so they're extremely compacted. They, don't have a lot of organic material. And really, composting increases all that. And it also, when we add that organic material, it's going to help with the water holding capacity of the soil. So it's going to allow more water to stay on your site in the root zone, which is better for your plants. It helps loosen that compacted soil by adding that organic material, helps with soil fertility and root development. So if we think back to the beginning of agriculture, they were using manures. They discovered that decomposing matter, like, rotten fish or manures or things like that, made plants grow. And so as we compost things and make it so that we're not burning our plants, they're composted, they're much more bioavailable, and those nutrients can really help the plant. And microorganisms. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. And basically, having a favorable environment for microorganisms and the different fungi and bacteria that live in the soil is really important for our plants. And, if you don't like gardening, maybe just reducing your waste to the landfill is enough to say, hey, let me give it a try. Us gardeners get excited about harvesting our humus and things like that. But if you have a friend that's like, oh, I'm not into that, they can think about it too, just because they can put a lot of their scraps into the compost that are going to be deferred from that landfill without even worrying about when to turn it and when to harvest it and things like that. So, if you have people that aren't necessarily gardeners, that's a good way to kind of talk to them about it. And so my job previously was with the Orange County Environmental Protection Division, where I would survey the lakes and rivers and streams of Orange County. And one day I went to bring a water sample. Occasionally I did biology, but occasionally I'd have to do water samples for our team. And so I had a water sample from a lake and I brought it to the utilities laboratory, and I noticed a smell as soon as I opened the door, and I thought, what is that? And I saw these bottles sitting on the laboratory bench, and it was actually the leachate testing from our landfill. And it's just something to think about, that everything that we throw away goes to these landfills. And these are managed systems. So they have liners and, testing. So that's what they were doing that day, is they were testing the water that leaches out of the landfill system. They test it for different heavy metals or things like that. But anything that we can do to reduce that, 13% of all landfills are made up of yard waste, or 3.5 tons. And that doesn't even include our food scraps. So anything we can do to reduce that is going to be a win-win-win for our society, for our people, for our environment, so composting does all that. So it's just something to consider as a different angle. I know most of you are into it because you're gardeners, but thinking about the real impact that you're having by not sending your stuff to the landfill is great. And then, another thing is, a lot of people can overthink it. Like, did I cut that piece too small, or did I turn it too often? And we'll get into all that. But I just want to bring it back to basics here, that compost happens. If we go for a walk in the woods today, we're going to see composting happen. Decomposition, microbes, fungus, insects, different critters are helping these leaves turn into topsoil. And we're just kind of doing this in a more managed way, a more maybe scientific way. But we don't need to, especially if you're just starting out, if you're beginning, follow the basics and let the microbes do the work for you. Don't overthink it. And I have had some people, kind of, and even when I started out, I just didn't really know how to do it. So we'll give you the basics today, but just know that nature is on your side with this one, and different things like that. So for composting, our goals for composting, when we think about this, again, most of you are probably going to be in the Make Garden Compost Soil camp. Another goal could be to defer waste from the landfill. So like I said, if you have a buddy that's not really into gardening, they can still do it. Now, these are going to be two different ways to manage your pile or your system. So if you're into gardening and you want that humus, you're going to want to commit to turning the pile, at least occasionally. You want to cut it into smaller pieces. So like crunching up those eggshells. Be specific about what you're adding in there. Make sure that you're a little bit more judicious if you have company over, that they're not just throwing stuff in, because what you put in is what you're going to get out for your vegetable gardening. And a little bit more of a proactive stance. However, if you're just deferring waste from the landfill, or you're working with a neighbor or something to do that, they don't have to turn it. They don't have to worry about the size of the stuff. They can be more flexible about what they add in, a little bit more lazy about it, so to speak. So, these are just things to consider, when I talk about the goals of composting. And then, what is compost? So compost is the dark, crumbly material created when microorganisms break down organic matter. So it could be leaves, twigs, grass clippings, kitchen waste. Humus is the fully decomposed product. So it's, you're not seeing any banana peels or, really eggshells or things like that, even though the eggshells do take a long time to decompose. When you're composting at home, here's our things that pretty much have a green light. Now, there could be some caveats, like if you vacuumed up some glass or plastic items, you don't want to put that. But if it's just dust or pet fur, things like that, you're fine to add that in. Even some things like spoiled grains, so maybe they expired or went rancid, those are fine to put in if they're cooked or uncooked. Stale bread, cooked pasta, wood shavings, the sawdust, bird cage. So I myself have quail, and so we use that quail in the compost. That's a great source of nitrogen. Or even if you have chickens or other types of birds, bird waste is perfectly good. Any kind of poultry base, so turkeys, chickens, birds, anything like that. And then ruminant animals, so manures coming from hooved animals such as cows or goats, different things like farm animals. One thing you do want to avoid is those carnivorous animals, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Seaweed or different types of invasive aquatic plants. So thinking about like our invasive water hyacinth or hydrilla, if you kind of pull that out of a lakeside, composting that is going to be ultimately good. And lots of options here. So talking a little bit more in depth about what you don't want to compost, what you kind of want to avoid is here in red. So any kind of meats or cheese. And, I kind of put an asterisk there because if you have a stir fry with a little bit of chicken in there that went bad, if you're just putting a little bit and you're burying it deep into the pile, so you're getting your pitchfork, you're opening it up, you're putting it into the pile. This is not something you'd want to start out with, so if you have a hot pile, then you could feasibly add a little bit in there. It's not a huge deal. Now, if you put bones in, you are going to see them on the other side. Same thing with fish. Little fish bones, they'll tend to kind of break down, but you want to insert it. And this is for a lot of reasons, but essentially that heat in the inside is going to help it to break down, and it's not going to really hurt the microbial balance of your pile. If you, also have an open pile or, something without a lid, then critters might be very interested in meat. So you want to make sure that we're burying it, preventing any of that smell. Weed seeds and diseased plants. So if you have something that just had an outbreak of fungus, or you just pulled a lot of weeds that have a lot of seeds on them, I definitely recommend, avoiding those and putting them in the yard waste. If they're an invasive species, then you probably want to take it a step further and bag that and put it in the trash, especially if there's seeds on them. If it's a fleshy invasive species, and I'm trying to think, so like back to our aquatics, like, any kind of water hyacinth or things like that, those are invasive, but they're also very fleshy. And so they will break down. They're not going to have seeds on them. Really highly glossed papers, so if you're doing cardboard boxes, you want to avoid the ones with that really plasticky film on them. Just stick with your browns. It's just going to be decomposing faster and not putting anything questionable in your pile. Lots of citrus skin. So, if you have a little thing from your iced tea and it has a little squeeze of lemon, no big deal, put it in. But we're talking if you are consuming during, citrus season, a bag of oranges every other day, or you're juicing a lot of oranges, that could actually take a long time to break down. And ultimately, it's going to leave a more acidic type compost pile. So just something to think about. You want smaller pieces. So again, if it's already kind of cut into little pieces, or like tangerine skin is much more delicate, or mandarin skin, but those big navel orange skins can be a little big. Dog or cat poo, any kind of carnivore, is avoidable. Large branches, anything bigger than your thumb. So we want, twigs and things like that. In there is fine a little bit. You kind of break them down or machete them. But anything bigger than your thumb is going to be taking too long to break down, unless it's a really decomposed piece of wood. Like if you have a really rotten piece of wood that's falling apart, then it's more in the sawdust type category. And then again, things that are great. So watermelon rinds, kitchen scraps, nutshells, paper towels, the inside of those little brown tubes for the toilet paper and the paper towels, tissues. So, as long as it's nothing too crazy, tissues can be a great addition to your compost pile. They will break down. Any kind of manures and dried herbs, if you're cleaning out your cabinets. As long as there's not too much salt, you don't want to just put salt in there. But if it's a blend and it has mostly like old oregano or something, that'd be fine. Any kind of cooked rice, stale bread, even sour milk can have some bacteria in there that'll actually help the pile, and things like hair. So I actually keep a little trash can in my bathroom that I can put like, the hair from my brush or tissues or, those little toilet paper roll things in there. And then once that fills up, that can go to the compost pile. So once we know what can be composted, we definitely want to kind of start to put these into two camps, we'll call them. And so the green camp and the brown camp. Green is going to be, for example, things that are high in nitrogen. And you might say, well, how do I know if it's higher nitrogen or not? Well, things that are green are basically, if you think about putting them in a bucket, they're going to get pretty stinky. So if you put a bunch of banana peels in a bucket, after about a day or so, they're going to get pretty stinky. Things like fruit and vegetable scraps, eggshells, grass clippings, they get kind of matted. So they're going to decompose pretty quickly and get kind of stinky. That signals something that's high in nitrogen. For browns, on the other hand, if we put a bucket full of leaves, it's probably going to be leaves for the next couple of months, right? It's going to take a while to decompose. So wood chips, sawdust, newspaper, cardboard, any of those types of things. They're just slow to decompose. They're high in nitrogen or high in carbon. And so, what we want to do is think about what we have and then create a balance of these two. So there is, if we want to get more scientific about it, there's the carbon to nitrogen ratio. This can get a little complicated. So I just kind of like to cross it out and say, let's not get too complicated about it. But just in case you're interested, you've been avid composting for years, and you want to know, here's basically where it talks about the amount of carbon and the amount of nitrogen in that specific food. So food waste, fruits like banana peels, those are considered to be a green, and the carbon to nitrogen ratio is 35:1. So it does have a fair amount of carbon in there, but it also, the ratio, it does have a lot of nitrogen. We look at something else like sawdust, it has a lot of carbon in it, but not a lot of nitrogen. So, this is kind of a more scientific way of looking at, if I put it in a bucket, will it stink? If I put it in a bucket, will it decompose quickly? And so, just that's there for you. Once we understand if it's a green or a brown, we want to get the right ratio of greens to browns. And what I like to say is 1 part greens to 2 part browns. So let's say we have, for example, a large bag of grass clippings. Now, I'm like to be lazy and leave them on the lawn, but some people like to rake them up. So we have one bag. Now we want to put this in the compost pile, but we want to layer on top of it 2 trash bags of brown leaves. And, in this case, they're actually green and actually brown. That's not always the case, right? A brown banana peel doesn't mean it's a brown. So, the color thing is a little misleading, but basically the take home message is one part of something that's high in nitrogen or is going to get kind of rotten to 2 parts browns that are high in carbon, and they're going to take a lot longer to decompose. And when we put this together, we tend to get the perfect ratio for microbes, that they have a nice amount of nitrogen and a nice amount of carbon. Now, there are things that can speed up the compost process. And I do see a few questions coming in, and we'll save those till the end, where we do have a little time. So of course you could cut things up into smaller pieces if you wanted to, like say I'm going to compost and have soil by fall for my fall vegetable garden. You probably want to, make sure that you're cutting, scissoring things up before you put them in there. Make the pile bigger. So, 3 feet. So you got to have a larger amount of material so that you can get that heat going, and then turn it a little bit more frequently. And make sure that you have a great ratio of 1 part greens to 2 part browns. Now, we want to make this easy for ourselves, right? We want to make it so that we don't have fights in the family about who's taking out what and where the pile is and all that stuff. So make it easy on yourself. Pick a method that works for you. I can tell you, for our family, we've been using a glass jar for years, just to the left of the sink. So when we're cooking, we can put stuff into that jar, and pretty much later that night or the next day, it goes out to the pile. I can see if it's getting funky in there, and the jar with the lid helps to keep it from getting too stinky. Some people might just want a bucket. After you cook, you put the stuff in there, bring it out. Others might like a 5-gallon bucket under the sink. Like say you have something where you're cooking for a lot of people frequently, then you might be able to fill that up in a couple days, and that works for you. I have a friend who likes it just, it's just her. So it's just a little Tupperware in the freezer. And so, it's not a lot of food and scraps and things, where just a little Tupperware in the freezer is going to work for her. And then the different types of bins. So you have these kind of, the earth machine and different types of bins and digesters. Really, again, compost happens. Don't feel like you have to have the best composter on the planet. If you build something, if you buy something, it's, as long as you're getting it right with what you're putting in there, how you're, get your greens to brown ratio, it's going to work out. All right, my mouse is glitchy. You could do cinder blocks. You can do old pallets. When I was keeping chickens years ago, I would just screw the pallets together and put the stuff in there, like the manures and things, let that sit for a while, and then unscrew the pallets to have, a really nice garden bed right there. And it was just a 1-bin system. You could have a 3-bin system where you fill the first one up, go to the second one, fill the second one up, go to the third one, fill the third one up. And the idea is once that's full, you go back to the first cell, and it's going to be probably ready for a harvest. They have tumblers. So if you're in our bear area, our bear ordinance area around Wekiva, or some of those other areas where you might see some bears, you might consider a tumbler that is a fully enclosed system. And this is really important if you're out there in the outskirts of the county, because we don't want to have bear interactions. They are not good for the bears. They are not good for us. And typically bear human interactions will end with a sad bear, because if they're a threat to humans, that's what happens. And so we don't want to be drawing them into our homes. If you've seen bears in your neighborhood, definitely consider an enclosed tumbler. And then you can do things like what we're giving away today is kind of a similar system to this. It's a geobin, so it's going to be much more long term. You're going to have that for a long time, where a chicken wire might, start to rust and things after a while. So, it's just a different type of system, but this is very easy too, where you would just stick a few dowels in the ground, wrap the wire around, and then you can just start doing it. So if you have an excess of manure or different things, this is an easy way to just capture that nutrients. The most effective is going to be a 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot. So once you get to that, then you can start thinking about leaving it to digest and really break down, just burning it occasionally. That's going to effectively retain the heat. So, if it's a smaller pile, it's not going to be as hot. And so like with this one here on the left, basically it looks like a lot of greens in there, a lot of nitrogen. We need to add out some of that browns, add in some leaves and browns, newspaper, things like that. Piles larger than 5 feet tall may not get enough oxygen, enough aeration. So the bacteria on the inside need a little oxygen to do their processes and water. So if it's 5 feet or bigger, it might slow that process. And then thinking about the location. So if some of you are in a homeowners association, certain considerations for that is to, that really by law, they have to allow you to do Florida friendly. So, anybody in Florida can do Florida friendly landscaping principles. They have to have a process to move you through that. But you also have the responsibility to work with them, to talk to them about what you're doing, gain their approval. Do they want it in the backyard? Do they want it to be pink or beige or whatever color a certain type of bin maybe is required? So think about all that before you do it. We really recommend that you work with your HOA in advance. What level are you looking at? Are you going to go for a 3-foot pile or maybe a 4-foot pile, something bigger, smaller, well-drained area? So, you want it to be able to percolate down. You don't want to put it in a really wet, puddling area. You want it, if it's in the sun, it's going to get a little hotter. If it's in the shade, it'll also prevent it from drying out so much. Protected from drying winds, so maybe close to a fence line or something like that. Convenient, so near your garden or maybe where you're planting a future garden, right? So you just get rid of the thing and plant, your vegetables. And at least 2 feet from a building, so definitely not too close to your house. So we have, saved our kitchen scraps, we've saved our leaves in buckets, and now we're ready to start the layering process. So we have a layer of, what I recommend too is to start your pile, put down a good 3 to 6 inches of branches. Okay. If we got a storm, collect up those branches, give it a good 3 to 6 inches to kind of, put it in there at the bottom. And that's going to provide a little aeration from the under part of the thing. Once you got that twig layer, then you're going to add in a little bit of browns and then greens, a little bit of browns and greens, and so on. And basically every time you add your kitchen scraps or something green, you need to put that brown on top of it. And that's going to help sequester the odor from critters. And it's going to create that ratio. And see here in this picture, you can see it's about 1 part greens, nitrogen rich, to 2 part browns. So if I have a 1 gallon jar, when I bring that out to my compost pile for my kitchen, I'm going to add 2 gallons of leaves to that. Okay, so if it's just a handful of banana peels, then a couple handfuls of leaves. Really simple when we think about it in parts. So here's kind of a cross section of a good hot compost pile. You have that core, which is under compaction. It has the water vapor kind of going up, the cool air is going up. It's heating up by that core where the microbes are causing the heat. And a good compost pile is hot from within from the microbes. The sun might heat it up, but really the microbes are what is creating that heat. You can turn your pile. I definitely recommend a pitchfork over a shovel because shovels tend to get kind of stuck and pitchforks will go right through and provide that aeration into the pile. Managing your water. So if you have a closed system, you have to be responsible for how much water goes in, how much goes out. Okay, so if you have an open system like chicken wire or one of those geo bins or things like that, then the rain is going to be on your side. But you don't want it too soggy. You want it to kind of be moist. So just kind of checking that water levels is going to be helpful. And the temperature, really the ideal temperature for compost is about 120 degrees. But I like to say, just kind of use your hands and try to understand if does it feel warm? As you're getting in there with the pitchfork, are you feeling a little warmth come out? Is it looking like things are breaking down? And that's going to be perfectly adequate. When it gets up to the higher temperatures, that's more industrial based. Like if we went to Disney, they would have an industrial grade composter where they're tracking the temperature and things like that. Just something to consider. And then when is it ready? When is it turned to humus? Well, there's no magical number or enough days or whatnot, but generally it can take 6 weeks to 6 months or 2 years. So like I said, if we just have a bin of leaves, it's going to take that bin of leaves a really long time to break down. However, if we've done the greens and brown ratio and we've been a little bit more judicious about what we're putting in and we're cutting things up, it might be as soon as, 3 months. Something like that. During the summertime, things are moving a lot quicker. So it just really depends on a lot of factors. But either way, those microbes are going to be cowing down. And then troubleshooting. So if it's stinky and, maybe you're getting complaints from family or friends or neighbors, you probably have too much nitrogen. You probably have too much greens. Hopefully you haven't put meat in there or anything super rotting, and if you have done some kitchen scraps, you're adding in those browns, so it might have too much moisture, too wet, lack of oxygen. So what we would do for that is to mix in our brown material, put in some leaves, sawdust, turn the pile, aerate it, to be able to do that, and then pull back the watering. If it's too cold, so it's like, okay, it's not really doing anything. I've seen that banana peel in there for like 8 weeks. You probably have a lack of nitrogen. You need some more banana peels. Lack of moisture, maybe you need to water it. Or it could be also excess moisture where it's, just too wet. So think about adding in some of those green materials, aerating the pile with your pitchfork, maybe dampen the pile if it's too dry, allowing it to dry out if it's too wet, open the pile, add some, little sawdust, and things like that. Pests. So you could have, food obviously in the pile could attract critters. Well, one way to do that is to really bury the stuff deeper. And so if you're getting raccoons or other critters of interest, don't forget, one of our principles is attract wildlife. And so, those aren't necessarily a nuisance unless they're in your attic. Then we have a problem. If they're just stealing a quick banana peel, it's not a huge deal. They're trying to survive in this urban matrix, just like we are. So, think about it in that way, but, also think about maybe you do want to add a little chicken wire to the top. Maybe you do want to bury your stuff when you're bringing out your kitchen scraps, you use the pitchfork, bury it a little deeper, add a little extra browns to kind of, so they don't smell it and get attracted to it. Now, again, bears are a whole different story. We're talking little critters like possums or little raccoons, things like that. And then if you want to get extra input, so manures, Seminole County, I saw somebody's in Chuiliota. We have lots of horses. We have, farms and cattle and things like that. Maybe you have a school pet that you can use, the pet litter, or even our local zoo. As long as it's not a carnivore, it could be a possible area. Food scraps. So there's lots of waste in our society that we can take advantage of. Restaurants, produce stores, school cafeterias, as long as it's what you're looking for, that fruit and vegetable type realm, and they're not mixing in, bones and meats and things like that, then that could be great. Newspapers, cardboard, so grocery stores, convenience stores, And then of course, bagged leaves, I've seen so many bags of leaves, and it's like people are just giving away free and valuable resources that is, provided by our trees. We want to use those leaves as mulch. We want to use them in our compost. And so, talking to your neighbors, if they don't use pesticides or other types of chemicals, those would be great addition as well. And then vermiculture. So, thinking about maybe a worm bin if you are in an apartment or a more smaller area, you don't have, an area where you can put a compost pile. These are an enclosed area. So I keep mine kind of by the carport. You do want to have specific bedding for these, and they take a little bit more attention. But you get the worm tea and the worm castings, which are really great for your garden. Earthworms. So you probably will eventually see, as you do the composting, you'll see these earthworms. So you can see the red wigglers or maybe even the fishing worms that start to come in. Those are great. All of them are beneficial. They're an indicator of good soil quality. They're going to help decompose anything that's in the compost. They're going to aerate the compost, which is great. And, don't add any earthworms in there. It's just, they might make their way to your neighbor's yard for all we know, so unless it's a closed system like a worm farm or a worm bin, you don't really want to be adding in earthworms, but they will tend to make their way there. And then again, leaves. I can't stress the importance of leaves for a good compost bin. Rake them up, put them in the bin, use them as a self-mulching area in your landscape beds, use them in your garden beds, on top of your vegetables, things like that. And then grass clippings, leave them on your lawn is the preferred. If you rake them up, put them in the compost pile, but absolutely let's not let them go down our storm drains and provide pollution to our lakes and threats during our hurricanes, right? We need these to be clean and free. We don't want to be putting leaves or debris or grass clippings down our storm drain. And then finally, just adding 1 to 3 inches of compost to the soil surface, or mixing it into 4 to 6 inches into your landscape if you're starting a new landscape is going to be a great way to enhance your landscape and, provide that nutrition, that organic manure, organic material to your landscape. So, get those scraps together for your compost, recycle, and recycle those scraps. So again, I will be sending out a survey to your email just as we finish. We will take some questions and then we'll wrap up. I also want to share a recent EDIS publication that I produced with some of my colleagues. Let me just pull it up here. And see if I can get this. Yeah. So we made this UFIFIS extension EDIS publication, and we are making a series for you guys. So it's all about Florida-friendly edible landscaping. And I'll put it in the chat right now to everyone. It's called Recycling Organic Material to Improve Your Florida-Friendly Landscape. And take a look at it, give it a read. It talks about how we can be more Florida friendly with our edible landscaping. And again, it's part of a series. So we do have a couple publications available now. This is one of them. And then we also have several more coming. So I have one that's going to be mulching your edible landscape. We're doing soil and fertility of your Florida-friendly edible landscape. Let's see what else we have. Managing pests in your edible landscape, and lots of other things. Another EDIS publication I produced last year that I'll put in the chat now. I know it's just a gray screen. I don't know. I think I shared just the PowerPoint. So, but this one is called Concepts for Sustainable Landscape Mosaics. And this is more for attracting our pollinators, attracting our you know, different types of bees and butterflies, and providing some seasonality to our landscapes. So that's another one that I just put in the chat. And then finally, we have our edible landscaping using the 9 Florida friendly principles. So here's another ATIS publication that we produced for you. And stop sharing screen, because I know I'm just doing gray boxes probably for you guys right now. Sorry about that. And then let me navigate back to my Zoom, because I do have another class coming up this week on Wednesday that you can get a free book. And I know most of you are in Seminole County in the Sanford area and would love to have a free book, right? So I'll put a link in the chat right now. This is our next class this Wednesday, the 26th at 10 a.m. And it's called Plant This, Not That, Avoiding Invasive Plant Species in Your Landscape. And I wrote a book last year, so you will get a free copy of that book, Compliments of Seminole County. As long as you can drive to our office and come check us out, you can come pick up the book. So join us. We have lots of free goodies. So register for that webinar today so that you can take advantage of that next week. And so with that, I hope you have enjoyed some of these resources, and we will turn to questions. Okay, so is aeration different from loosening compacted soil? Not really. It's basically the same thing. So it can be done for you by ants or worms or moles, or you can do it with a pitchfork. Or when you add compost, it's generally going to keep that soil more fluffy and aerated. How about bokashi for cooked food, meats, and cheeses? Jacqueline, I don't know. I've never done bokashi, and I don't have any science-based stuff from UF-IFAS on that. But that's a great question. Use tissues. Yes, I would say yes, as long as there's no fecal matter on them. You know, obviously we are omnivores, so we fit into the carnivore category, as you know, most of us probably eat meat. Just depending on, you know, but you just want to avoid that altogether. So if you're just, you know, wiping your face, no big deal. And yeah, so cats and dogs, even if it's a non-GMO, and the reason is because they have different bacteria in their gut. And so those types of bacteria are just not going to be helpful for us. And typically, again, we are not creating industrial grade compost piles that can get to 140 degrees at a regulated temperature, you know, like Disney or other larger entities. We are probably going to be lucky if we hit 120 degrees. And so those bacteria are going to persist, and we definitely want to avoid those. Okay, so the 1 part to 2 part, is it volume or weight? I would say generally weight, but I don't want you to get to like, don't measure things, you know. Generally a part is, you know, leaves are pretty fluffy, but your kitchen scraps are going to be pretty fluffy too. You know, it's something that doesn't have to get too scientific, honestly. We're just making sure that it's about double, you know, in that way. So let's see. Okay, thank you for your positive comments. And now I'm checking. Yes, we have done a little advertising of our publications on the Facebook page, but usually it's just kind of when they come out. I actually, since I am working on so many EDIS publications, I was thinking about creating a little kiosk at our office that you could actually see all the publications that I've worked on. And so that's just an idea, but yeah, sharing them on social media is something we'll continue to do. And I have another one that we did for fertilizer, for our fertilizer work. If any of you have participated in those classes, I'll put in the chat just because, you know, thanks Erin for your interest. And it's called Quantifying Impacts on Fertilizer Workshops on Nitrogen Leaching and Subsequent Economic Impacts, a case study. And that case study is done right here in Seminole County. So we offered lots of classes. And I'll just put that in the chat. That's another EDIS publication for you to check out on fertilizer and all the great work we're doing here in Seminole County to help our water bodies. I am going to email you a survey, and you'll see that in your inbox right after we hang up. So the Zoom will load, and then I will get your emails, and I will send you from my Qualtrics thing. You have to fill that out to qualify for one of the 3 bin giveaways. And I'll tell you, your odds are pretty good. Usually we have over 100 people on our webinars, but today we just have a small group of 30. So, you know, odds are pretty good you might win. And I'm seeing, we're addressing them. Orange County offers composting program to residents. Do you see something like this happening in Seminole? Right now, we're stringing along what we can. Call your cities, call your, you know, commissioners, and let them know that this is something you're interested in. You know, we get funding from UF, we get funding from Seminole County, and when we can, we buy these to make them available to you. So we're doing what we can. And let's see, on the spreadsheet, it says not to add worms to the compost, because the worms are going to be making their way out. So we tend to, you know, you don't want to waste your money. The red wigglers can be very expensive. And so unless it's a closed system, you know, they're going to be leaving. And so you definitely just don't want to waste your money in that way. All righty. Can you use old shredded mail to compost? Sure, as long as it's not, again, super waxy or you know, things like that, or like the little envelopes tend to have the little plastic window. You will see that on the other side of the humus. So you just want to be careful with that. How much chicken manure can you add before you make it too hot for the plants? So you can add as much as you want. And you know, if you're farming your birds with, you know, pine shavings, I always like those. When I did the hay, was a little not as absorbent. So I always did the pine shavings. Personally, that worked for me. If you're doing hay and pine shavings and you're getting that balance where it's not just all manure, or even those pellets, maybe like horse pellets or whatever you're using to balance it out, you can just put all that in the compost and let it sit. You know, it's going to take some time to where it's not going to burn anymore. You're going to want to turn that because, again, the hay can get very matted. And so turn it, aerate it, make sure it's not getting too wet and too stinky. But yeah, chicken manure is great. You just want to have that balance. So again, balancing the nitrogen and the manure with the hay and the brown or the pine shavings or whatever you're using to balance it out. And then yes, you can add that in. All right. Do you offer educational classes for homeschoolers? You know, if you have a group of 20 people or however many you have, you know, send me an email. I'll put my email in the chat and we can see if we can arrange something. But we do like to have a good audience. So you have to guarantee us some people and then we can talk. So let's see. Can we tour the community garden? That's a Kelly question.
I did answer in the chat, but we are locked 24 hours a day unless a gardener's there, just because we kind of considered our refrigerators that people are renting plots. But I'm happy to set up a tour with anyone if you email me. But also I put that we do have our second Saturdays once a month. So it's on the second Saturday in the morning, and we post those to Facebook and to our website. So anyone can come out at that time and tour and look around, and you can even help with our community service if you'd like. So February, we'll be doing a park cleanup because we adopted 18th Street Park. So we do a cleanup every third month. So we're going to start our new year in February with the cleanup, and we love to have people out there helping to beautify the park. So that you can just like us on Facebook and make sure you like the extension office Facebook page too, because there's a wealth of resources. And then you can see all these different events that Tina's talking about and that we have at the garden also.
Excellent. Yeah, that sounds great, Kelly. So 1 or 2 more questions and then we'll wrap it up. Do you have hydroponic events? So our sustainable agriculture agent, Morgan Pinkerton, does offer hydroponics classes. Check our Facebook, like us, all that good stuff. And you can see when she is doing those. How often should we turn our compost? Again, it kind of depends on if you're in the landfill camp and you're just lazy about it, you don't even have to worry about it. If you want your humus, once a week is good. At least once a month, get in there and, leverage that pitchfork. And you don't need to turn the whole thing upside down. Just a simple put in the pitchfork, allow that aeration in there, mix it up a little bit, and that will be good enough. And then, yeah, I'm not sure if the zoo offers it, but it doesn't hurt to ask, and it would be an interesting day, right? You get to see the animals and leave with some manure. So yeah, you never know. So I will be emailing you the survey. Check your email shortly. It'll take the Zoom a couple, maybe minutes. Hopefully it'll go quick to process the video recording. And yeah, we will post this on our YouTube. So if you want to share it with friends later, and then definitely look for that Qualtrics link to fill out that survey. And I will get back to you later this week. Give me a couple days to kind of make sure everybody's done the survey and decide. I usually do a random number generator to select who is the lucky winner. So maybe it'll be you, but if you haven't heard from me, let me get through this week and we'll be deciding hopefully by Friday. So, and we'll contact you by email. So thank you so much. And yeah, great to have all of you in the webinar today. And thanks for your great questions. And thank you so much, Kelly, for reaching out and for making this happen.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I learned some stuff too. So hope everyone's excited to start some composting.
Nice. Well, y'all have a great weekend and yeah, get out there and compost. We'll see you next time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.